Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Wednesday, September 25th, and we are now welcomed in by Baylor Director of Sports Journalism, Jerry Hill, to recap Baylor's incredibly difficult loss to Colorado, preview the upcoming home game with BYU, and also recap the weeks of Baylor soccer and Baylor volleyball. Jerry, let's just get right into that game. The Colorado game, you lose it in overtime. And I've been thinking about this, and I know we talked about this just a minute ago, but I don't know if I can think of another loss as gut-wrenching, considering the circumstances and the way it played out in a long time. I know there are some. Do you have any on top of your mind that kind of come to mind about that?
Yeah, I think the one that immediately came to me, and I know it's been a while, but was Kevin Steele's either first or second game. It was against UNLV. And, Baylor's down on the goal line on offense, and all you got to do is take a knee and you win the game. And, he went for it, and the running back fumbles it, and they go 99 yards for a touchdown. Again, in that game, you have complete control. In this one, you say Baylor had it in control, and they certainly had it in their grasp, but the other team's on offense, so you can't control all of that. But this one, against UNLV back in '99, you could absolutely control that one. So that was kind of the one that came to mind. And here's just kind of a side note to that, Colt. Bryce Cherry and I, we were both at the Trib at that point. We were actually in the elevator coming down and did not even see that play. So we're coming out of the elevator and we're walking, out, toward the field. And you could just tell there was something that happened because the fans weren't like celebrating or anything. It was just, it was almost kind of eerie. And then we walk out there and the scoreboard hadn't even changed, but it basically changed right as we walked out there. And you're like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And I think there was a little bit of that same thing, the other night was what just happened.
Yeah. Could you imagine that particular game, the UNLV game, with YouTube and social media and the backlash? You get immediacy if you're at the game, but you're not getting that type of reverb effect immediately in that. Yeah, I can't imagine. Saturday was tough. A lot of things Baylor did well in that game. But in a lot of ways, you look back to for me, it was the TCU game in 2022, and there's some other ones, but the 22 TCU game against a top 5 ranked opponent, you had that game in control have an opportunity to put it away late. You don't do it, give TCU one more chance, and they kick a walk-off field goal on you. So, but this one was just different. Like you mentioned, having control of it, but truly it came down to a couple plays of end of the first half, end of the game, kind of two miracle style of events that happened with the tackle that wasn't a tackle and they scored a touchdown to cut it to 24-17, and then this one. So two plays really ended up being the difference in it. But with that, there are, I would say, positives from this game, and I think it starts with the pass rush. 8 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 16 quarterback hurries, and truthfully, like we know Colorado's offensive line hasn't been their strong suit. It's been discussed widely for the last 2 years. But 8 sacks is the most Shedeur Sanders has ever been sacked at Colorado. He's had a couple of 7-sack games, but if it wasn't for the loss, that would have absolutely, to me, been the storyline of this particular game, because it's something that everybody thought Baylor had potential to do, but hadn't shown it yet because of the competition. But then there's eight sacks, probably could have been like 10 or 11. No issues if you just wrap up Sanders. But how big was that for that to emerge in the game, and how does that set up for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I was just I kind of thought going in that's how they were going to attack it, like try to get in his face, put some pressure, because they really hadn't done a lot of that, Colt, like you said, in those first 3 games. I think they had 4 sacks in the first 3 games and just really hadn't put a lot of pressure on court. Of course, some of that was you were facing teams that were running the ball a lot. You'd only been passed on 46 times. So that was part of it. But man, they did show an amazing ability to get there. Now, I will say in the first half, and we had only had like 2 or 3, something like that. And I was thinking, man, how did Nebraska have 5 on this guy? Because he kept escaping, like you said. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Dave said could have been double the 8. I don't know that it was that many, but there were that many like pressures and stuff. But yeah, in the first half, I was going like, how did Nebraska get 5 sacks on this guy? Because he had such good escapability. But Baylor, yeah, just kept coming. I mean, you think about that last drive. Or even the drive before that, they sack him twice there to get him down to the 4-yard line. And I honestly, at that point, I thought the game was over, when you have them punting from their own end zone. But anyway, you sack him twice there. And even down to the last drive, they sack him twice on that drive, with not a lot of time left. So, really the defense was just relentless and good on him, on Shadur, to do what he did. And in a lot of instances, being able to get out of trouble and somehow escaping all that. And even on the last play, like, I know Dave talked about it after the game, but if the one guy stays on the right, keeps contained, I'm not even sure if the play even gets off. But he went up and under. I think it was Jaquez that did that. If he doesn't make that mistake, that play blows up or the pass never even happens. So, as much criticism as Dave has taken from, the 5-man rush and all that, if it had been executed right, that play would have blown up and we wouldn't be talking like this. We would be talking about, man, what a great road victory. But it didn't happen. So, that's how small things can be. Like one little mistake like that can cost you a football game.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that particular play and being that close. I mean, even Steve Linton in that moment was about a half a step away from that pass not getting off, even with the blown assignment on the containment. And then it just ultimately comes down to Shador Sanders having an NFL type of arm accuracy to put that ball where it needs to go. And that's what I told Grayson in our podcast recapping the game was, there's not many other guys that have that ability in that moment to make that throw. And then obviously receiver in a great position and makes a great play. So I think there are some frustrations of what happened on that play. Why wasn't it defended better? Well, then you also at the same time have to just give great credit because there's not many guys that can make that throw. And you start making the list of plays in the game. He said, if this happens, think about the Ashton Hawkins drop or missed throw by Sawyer Robertson in the first half. You're up 24-10. If he catches that ball, he's probably still running. You're up 31-10, and maybe Colorado just shuts it down. But it goes back. It's 24-10. Ends up being 24-17 at the half after a miraculous, kind of a non-tackle play. You see it all the time, but you just don't think it's going to happen to your own team. And it happened. And he goes and scores a touchdown and completely changes the outlook for Colorado. But man, is this a loss that's too devastating for Baylor mentally? What do you think about that as far as the way this team is made up with a tough game coming up against BYU?
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to is mentality. I mean, you can recover from this game physically. And again, like you pointed out, there were enough good things that you can leave that game going, we were that close. We should have won, but we did a lot of good things, even offensively, with what Sawyer was able to do with his feet. And some of those throws that he made, the great catch by Monterey. I mean, there's a lot of good in that game. But what you've got to do is get mentally right because, man, that can just suck the life out of you like that. And I think maybe last year, this team, that team would not have recovered from this. I think there's enough, guys in that locker room that are like, because I know Kyler Jordan talked after the game and he's like, there's enough guys there that we're not going to let this happen again. I think that's kind of the mentality, and that's the mentality you have to have. Like, we are not going to let this spiral like last year did, because, if you let this one turn into 2 to 3, this could easily be, I mean, technically this could be a 2-10 season, but I think they've got enough, mental fortitude, whatever it is. It's got to come from both the players and the coaches, though. They've got to, the coaches have to recover too, because that is a gut punch. I mean, that is one that's hard to overcome. So yeah, I mean, they've got to overcome that too. They've got to bounce back from that. But I think the players are the ones that are going to have to lead in this and make sure that everybody is on the same page. And hey, guys, let's flip that page. Let's go on to BYU, that kind of thing. So we'll see if they can do it. Colt, I think this team is capable, more so than last year for sure. And here's my deal, my kind of take on the game as well. This team is way better than last year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Like, as disappointing as, the loss at Utah was, as disappointing as this loss was, this team is way better than they were a year ago. So that's what gives me hope in these last 8 games, that they can still get, 6, 7, 8 wins, is that because I just think this team is way better. And I'm not sure the league is, I think there's a lot of winnable games, I guess, out there still.
Yeah, no, I think that you watch the other games that are happening, who's beating who. I mean, starting with BYU, I don't think anybody saw that game coming at all. Kansas State wasn't a heavy favorite, but it was a game where you didn't expect that to win. Now you play at BYU, and Baylor fans are very familiar with that atmosphere up there and how it can get rolling. But yeah, I don't know for this team particularly, like you mentioned, like there's so much contrast in a year ago, and it starts with the defensive front. I think specifically stopping the run, rushing the passer. I mean, 8 sacks in a game. Baylor had 18 of all last year. I mean, that's nuts to think about. And then you start talking about rush defense. They were dead last year in rush defense and yards per carry. That's completely flipped this year. Now it's going to get tougher. There's going to be more teams that can run the ball successfully, but so far they've done what they needed to do, and that's what you need. So let's look at that BYU game though for a second. Ended up being a blowout. I don't know if you've really looked at it other than the box score or watched the replay of it, but it was a very interesting BYU type of home win. They didn't do a ton offensively. They snuck in some special teams play. I was listening to Kalani Sitake talk about a special teams touchdown on a punt return, and it was a mistake that turned into a positive, but it was just like that home atmosphere of it was supposed to be a 70-yard return, but it ended up being 98 because he doesn't field it cleanly. He makes a mistake on the return, but he returns it for a touchdown. It's just like, you playing at BYU, that's probably going to happen. But they're kind of a different trend here with BYU. You get a huge emotional win against the number 13 Kansas State, where Baylor's on the road, heartbreaking loss. So the mentalities are completely different. You mentioned the mental part of this game for Baylor, but on the field, do you think there's a specific key to this game that Baylor needs to have to win it ultimately? I know you can point to 4 or 5, but is there one that sticks off the paper right now?
Like you said, if you look inside the numbers on that K-State game, K-State outgained them. There were just a lot of, time of possession, everything favored them except turnovers. So I think, to me, that is the number one thing. And Baylor's done a pretty, other than that last play against Colorado, Baylor's done a pretty good job with that. So I think that would be the number one thing for me. Yeah, like you said, Colt, they scored on that 90-yard punt return. They also scored on a 30-yard fumble return. So there's 14 of their 38 points. And it was a 6-0 game late in the first half. Kansas State leading, and I think they scored like 17. BYU scored 17 points in the last 2 or 2.5 minutes of the half. So that's kind of the way that game went. So to me, that's the biggest deal, is take care of the ball. And, and they've struggled with this, but I think on the flip side of that, you really need to get some takeaways, because they've struggled with that. They, and they haven't had a lot of opportunities in the past game. They did in this one and didn't get any. So that to me is kind of, 1A and 1B is don't turn it over and get some takeaways yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you put a quarterback like that under duress, you expect to get some turnovers. There was no interceptions. He did fumble at least once officially, one other time that Baylor had a penalty and negated it, but the bounces in that area went their way for sure. And Shedor's he's good at protecting the football. He doesn't have a lot of interceptions in his career. And so you hope in this game, to a quarterback that maybe obviously is not necessarily as talented as Shedor, that you can find those. You generate the pressure and you create those. So with that, on the opposite side of the ball for Baylor, Do you think that Sawyer Robertson is kind of entrenched as a starter now, or do you think there's still some leeway for Baylor to get back to DeQuan as he becomes more healthy?
I think based on how, Coach Aranda answered that in the Monday presser, it sounds like at least for now, Sawyer is the guy. I mean, he felt like he really played a really good game. I mean, he did miss on some passes, but he did what he needed to do to win that game, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to kind of use his feet more than you'd probably like and more than you probably planned on going into that game, but he took advantage of it. It was kind of similar offenses. Like, Baylor was struggling running the ball with the running backs, and so was Colorado. But both teams, kind of the bulk of their running yards came from the quarterback. So
Yeah.
he's shown that he can do that. So yeah, I think this week in particular, it's Sawyer. I think as DeQuan gets healthier and he's all the way back, certainly you use him and maybe ultimately you go back to him. But I think that's gonna, right now at least, gonna be kind of game by game, see how DeQuan is, recovering, but then also how Sawyer is performing. And I think right now Sawyer has to be your guy.
Yeah. I mean, if you would have told me that he had 2 passing touchdowns, 100 yards rushing with a touchdown, and despite the efficiency numbers, the completion percentage wasn't great, but he played a pretty secure game. He had one pass that you felt like, man, it was probably not a very good pass, but he took advantage of what was there. And I think that's what this offense needs. They need to be steady, let their defense, let their special teams work. And then as it grows and progresses, he just seems like right now he's going to be the guy that can help them do that the best. Now, DeQuan's legs are, I mean, they're special. And so if there's an opportunity to use it, it makes sense to be able to do it. So I'm with you. I think Sawyer is the guy until further notice. But I can't put it past this particular staff to figure out how to use DeQuan in the run game specifically. But he's also a threat to throw the football, and you can't overlook that. And you want a guy that can help you win games, especially if the offense gets bogged down. You're about to play a BYU defense that is, I would say, surging. They've played really well, played well against SMU, played well against, obviously, against Kansas State, and to a degree. They forced turnovers, got special teams help. But you never know what you're going to need. So, obviously, DeQuan needs to be ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, well, turning the page a little bit, I know that Baylor soccer and Baylor volleyball had decent weeks last week. I know there's some frustrating trends that continue for both programs. But let's look at the soccer team to start with. After that 5-1 start, I know that they've been 3 losses and a tie over its last 4 matches, including a 1-0 loss to Arizona Open Big 12 play. But they did bounce back. They got the win over Houston, which was encouraging, scored 4 goals in that game with a shutout. Now they're 6-4-1 overall, 1-2 in Big 12 play. But the next game looks like a pretty massive challenge, playing at Colorado, top 25 team, 9-1 overall, 3-0 in Big 12 play. Do you think that when we mentioned too, Colorado beat Oklahoma State, who we had just talked about last week? I mean, that just looks like a massive challenge right now for this particular soccer team, especially playing on the road. And I don't think the altitude affected the football team too much, but you're always curious in a game with soccer that you're moving a lot, how that could impact this particular game.
Yeah, they're just running so much, Colt, pretty much the whole game. I remember Coach Jobson talking about it when he was here, that, they might run like 10 miles or more in a game just because they're always constantly running, and you watch them. And so, yeah, I do think you worry about that a little bit at altitude. Like you said, I don't think football really either game at Utah or at Colorado was affected by it that much. But yeah, when you're running constantly like that, there's got to be some concern there. But I think probably, like you said, the biggest concern is just playing a really good Colorado team that might be the favorite right now, beating Oklahoma State like they did. And this is just a really good Colorado soccer team. So, Baylor's got its hands full, but I did think it was big, bouncing back like they did against Houston on Sunday. That generally happens, is like once you see one go through, kind of the floodgates opened in that one. Tyler Isgrig had a huge game, so I think she had a goal and 2 assists. So hopefully that kind of gets the momentum going a little bit. like you said, once they got that 5-1 start, they had struggled a little bit, 4 games in a row where they didn't get a win. So, to get that win on Sunday, hopefully that kind of gets them back on the right track. And big game next Sunday as well with TCU coming in, with both Tyler Isgrig and Azul Alvarez, the goalkeeper. Both of them started their careers at TCU. So I know there's going to be a lot of motivation going into that one for sure.
Yeah, no, it's they've played such a challenging non-conference schedule with the game at Iowa that they lost. But I mean, just in general, like you looking back to that Texas State game, you're like, man, I wish that would have been a loss. But you mentioned, I mean, what it wouldn't have been a loss. They had the opportunity to win at the end and couldn't close it. But it's not going to hurt them RPI wise too much. So you don't look at this record and say, man, that's tough, because it's ultimately they played a challenging schedule, and that's only going to help them for the long run. And you hope that going to Colorado, you don't want to just keep it close. You do want to win it, but be competitive in that game. Go in and battle and see where the rest of the season takes you. So what's the overall outlook now? I mean, they're in the Big 12 play and making the postseason. I mean, is that still in the cards for this thing?
I think it's definitely got to be a goal. And I said it all along that I think this is where this team is going to make its hay, is because, like you said, with the schedule they played, they don't have to, I don't think they have to have a great conference record, but they probably need to be over 500. And I think that's quite possible. I mean, you've got Colorado and West Virginia right now at the top at 3-0, TCU and Tech, both 2-0-1, but really everybody, other than those top two, everybody has at least a blemish, a tie or a loss. So I think they're right there. I mean, would you have liked to had, one of those other games? Sure. But I don't think they're in a bad position. I think they've got a lot of winnable games left. And I think the goal has to be not just to make the Big 12 tournament, but I think the goal has to be to get to the NCAA tournament. And like I said, I think they're capable. They got to take care of business in the Big 12. They do have some tough road games down the stretch at BYU. At Tech will be a tough one as well. But a lot of their tougher games are at home. So I like their chances, Colt. They just got to take care of business, though. They did Sunday against Houston, and I think if they can get at least one win this week, I think that would be a huge step in getting to postseason play.
Yeah, so they face Colorado Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Time on the road in Boulder. Will be a challenge. Like you said, I think winning the games that you're supposed to win, if there's any of those that can fall in that category, and then figuring out how to get an upset or two to go along the way to get to the NCAA tournament. So moving gears to the volleyball program. Right before we spoke last week, we talked about the Texas match. We said, man, if they could figure out how to win this one, and I think that ultimately was a competitive three-game match, but Texas swept them. The last two particularly were very close. If you can get the second one going into the third one, that one's even more important, but they couldn't get the second one. And then obviously the third one was obsolete as they lost that one as well. So, but they did bounce back, one over Hawaii 3-1, now 8-3 on the season. Non-conference is over. Lots of ups and downs. I know they had the win over Minnesota, defeated LSU. They've had some good wins, solid wins, but now they're in Big 12 play. And this is a team that have high expectations of getting into the postseason and advancing. Unlike soccer teams, they're building towards that as a program. Volleyball expects to be there. So face Arizona tonight, Wednesday night, and then Arizona State, two newcomers on Friday. Both of these matches are in Waco, and they'll both be played at 7 p.m. Central Time. But how important are these two games to kind of set the tone for the Big 12 season?
Well, I think it's really important, these first two conference matches at home, because then you go on the road to TCU, to BYU, to Utah. So you really need to get these first two. And like you said, kind of set the tone. I think this is going to be a very balanced league. I'm not sure that anybody is going to run away with it like Texas did for several years. So I think Baylor's going to be right in the mix. But to do that, they've got to beat like an Arizona State team here on Friday, when that's a ranked Arizona State team, 14th in the nation. So a win over them would really set you up well. Because again, I think that's probably, if not the best, one of the best teams in the league. If you could get 2-0 this week and start conference play that way, that would be big. But you have to get, Arizona at home. That's got to be a win. And then, maybe you can take Arizona State to 5 and maybe pull that one out. Yeah, back to the Texas one real quick. They just got off to a slow start in that one. They weren't really all that competitive in the first set. They kind of made a little bit of a run toward the end of that first set. And I think that kind of got them back into that mode of, we can stay with these guys, that kind of thing. So I think that was their mentality. They just weren't able to finish off those sets, and that's something they're still working on. They struggle with finishing. So if they can get better on that end, because this is a really good team. It's deep. They've got a lot of weapons. So if they can just figure out how to finish, kind of finish what they start, I guess, I think this could be a really good team. And like I said, maybe even contend for a conference championship.
Yeah, for this program that's been to a Final Four, it's been to the postseason over and over. The talent, they've recruited well. The talent's been there, and you have a league this year without a Texas in it that kind of just has dominated for so long. And I think that has to be encouraging. Of like, hey, you have more motivation, and not that they didn't have motivation before, but every single match could matter at the end of the season, and climbing towards a potential Big 12 championship. And I don't. Volleyball is such an intriguing sport because it's kind of foreign to me, right? Like I think it's I love watching. It's entertaining, but it's also like what goes into these games of figuring out who has the advantage. And obviously, if they're winning and you're not winning, the other team has the advantage, right? But it's just I just enjoy watching it, but I really don't know what I'm watching all the time, right? Yeah. So when I tune in to watch them play Texas or whoever, I'm like, hey, they're getting points, they're not getting points. And I feel like this team is always competitive and ready to go. And so that's what you want to see this week. You have 2 newcomers to the league, then you travel and hit the road. But if they can get off to a good start, you just have to feel good about the rest of the season, especially with Arizona State being, like you mentioned, one of the better teams in the league.
Yeah, and to your point, I'm probably a little bit more that way with soccer. Just because I'm kind of new to that game. I know I'm in my 17th year at Baylor, so it shouldn't be new to me anymore. But that's still kind of a relatively new sport for me that I had no idea about, kind of growing up, and maybe that's a Texas thing. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But I just had no background in soccer at all. So that's one I'm still kind of trying to learn and pick up things on. Volleyball, I'm a little more familiar with, and I guess I've kind of, because they've had the success that they've had, I've followed them maybe a little more. But again, I'm not going to sit here and say this is a Final Four team. This is a lot like the 2019 team. They don't have a Yassiana Presley. She's not walking back through that door. But they are a good team and they're deep. So I think that's what could help them, is that ability to rotate and keep players fresh, that kind of thing. And if they can use that depth, I think they can be a real threat in this league.
Yeah, I'm interested to see them play this week. Obviously, a couple of tough matches and get them started off right. But all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thanks to Jerry for hopping on with us again every single week on Wednesdays. And thanks to each of you for listening. I'm your host, Colt Barber. Have a great Wednesday, and sick 'em Bears.
Sick 'em Bears.